reporting system, DEI office, DEI officer, diversity training, and DEI-related courses. The bill's references to institutions of higher education only apply to public institutions or others that directly receive funding appropriated by the Idaho legislature. Part 2 outlines the DEI-related activities prohibited in taxpayer-funded institutions. Part 2A on page 4, line 32, prohibits group-based preferential treatment or discrimination in admissions, otherwise known as affirmative action, which simply codifies the 2023 Supreme Court rulings in the Students for Fair Admissions cases. Part 2B is similar, prohibiting such discrimination in hiring. Part 2C ensures the institutions that take our tax dollars do not have DEI offices or officers. The principle of good stewardship demands that when the legislature appropriates money to a school, it is directed to the intended purpose, education, rather than a divisive, activism-oriented administrative apparatus. 2D stops diversity trainings. 2E removes bias reporting systems. 2F prevents requiring or otherwise compelling students to take DEI classes. 2G restricts DEI-related incentives for faculty. In Part 3, it allows exceptions for DEI-related degrees that students choose to pursue. Part 4 requires annual reporting to the AG and House and Senate Education Committees certifying compliance. Part 5 outlines enforcement by the AG. The office would first investigate alleged violations, and if a violation is found, would send a detailed written description of the violation and a request for cure. Institutions would have 30 days to cure the violation, and if they refuse, the AG may file suit for a writ of mandamus or injunctive relief, and may also seek penalties up to 2% of operating expenses for the offending division, office, center, or unit. Part 6 is a private cause of action for students or staff to seek injunctive relief, but not monetary damages. Part 7 outlines what the bill does not do. Listen closely, senators. The bill does not limit academic freedom, research, creative works, student organizations that are not using state funds, non-compensated guest speakers at voluntary attendance events, or bona fide sex-based qualifications. It also does not prohibit regulation of non-constitutionally protected speech or measures for Title IX compliance, and does not affect centers or supports for students of recognized Indian tribes. Senators, by voting aye on this legislation, you will be standing for our core Republican values of academic freedom and good stewardship of tax dollars. Identity-based preferential treatment and incentives, administrative centers focused on imposing a concept of social justice that seeks to divide Americans into opposing identity groups, DEI indoctrination seminars, mandatory DEI classes in students' academic tracks, and Marxist biased reporting systems that create an atmosphere of fear actually chill freedom of speech and have no place receiving government support. I look forward to seeing our institutions of higher education fully focused on the important and excellent work that they do in equipping our students to think critically, seek truth, and receive the preparation necessary to succeed in their future careers. I ask for your aye vote today in support of this vision. Debate is open.
Mr. President. Wow. To debate against the bill, if our universities were indoctrinating our students, we would not be the reddest state in the nation. Our universities and colleges have done everything we've asked them to do. They've closed their DEI centers. They've increased their enrollment. They've improved their graduation rate. We should be celebrating them. Instead, we're taking money from the universities. We're passing bills like this, and frankly, it's hard to believe that this is how we talk about our universities in this state. They've done tremendous good, and they should be celebrated.
Mr. President,
Senator Rutke.
you know, I don't even recognize the universities that are being talked about in this legislation. But I want to just talk about some of the practical problems with this bill. My wife works at Idaho State University, the College of Education, and as a public school teacher and somebody who trains public school teachers, they want to make sure that children feel included. And so they talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's part of what they teach brand new teachers. But the definition that they use for those words, diversity, equity, and inclusion, are the ones that you and I recognize, the ones that are in the dictionary, frankly. Diversity just recognizes you're going to have kids in your classroom from all kinds of different backgrounds. Equity means you're going to treat kids equally. You're going to do your best to treat them fairly. And then inclusion, you just don't want kids to feel marginalized. That's the worst thing you could do to a kid who's trying to learn. So very simple definitions. Contrast that with the definition in this bill. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, means any trainings, programs, activities, or instruction that is derived from or that promotes the tenets or concepts of critical theory, including but not limited to the concepts of unconscious or implicit bias, microaggressions, internalized racism, cultural appropriation, structural equity, settler colonialism, group marginalization, systemic oppression, social justice, institutional or systemic racism, white fragility, racial privilege, disparate impact, intersectionality, sexual privilege, patriarchy, gender theory, queer theory, neo-pronouns, transgender ideology, misgendering, othering, dead naming, heteronormativity, allyship, or any other related formulation of these tenets or concepts. This definition shall also include any program, decision-making process, or initiative established for the purpose of, and then it goes on and on. This has nothing to do with how people at our universities or in our public school systems define diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are giving them an entirely new definition. It's going to create confusion. You're going to get a situation like you now have in Meridian, where when a teacher puts up a poster that says everyone is welcome here, she's told that that is an opinion, not a fact. That is nonsensical. But that's what happens when we dive into the inner workings of our local governments and our universities, and we get into the weeds. They are perfectly capable of fixing any excesses. And frankly, I think they have. But now we're going to create this bill that's going to have private cause of action. It's going to redefine diversity, equity, inclusion. It's going to confuse our university staff and faculty. They're not going to know what they can and can't do. And perhaps that's part of what is intended here, to create that confusion, to make everybody afraid to act. But we will lose more university personnel over this because of the frustration. They'll want to go to other states that are more friendly to their universities. And it's not going to turn out well for us. This is, in many respects, exactly what happened during the Red Scare. In fact, when I heard the introduction of the bill, it sounded very much like what you read about during McCarthyism. A claim that there was a communist in every nook and cranny of our government and universities. There wasn't. But there was a threat to our public education in that You have to love them. And you are going to get pushback. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, just out of caution, I'm going to declare a 39H, Rule 39H. I'm DEI certified, so just want to put that out there. And I'm not kidding, it's legit. And then I just wanted to debate on the bill, please.
Your declaration under the Senate rule will be noted in the journal.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You have the floor.
Thank you. So I think this is unfortunately a bill that we do need to pass. We have made some good changes in our colleges and universities, but that can change back at any time if we don't have clear definitions and a structure set forth to be able to utilize. And we want to make sure that we don't go back to some of the practices that have been transpiring with segregated graduations and classes that you have to take in order to be able to get your diploma or your degree. So we want to make sure that we're not creating segregation, that we're not marginalizing students, or creating an environment where not everyone feels welcomed. Currently, right now, there are dozens of schools that are facing investigation right now for racial preference practices, and they're all over the United States. So I think this is a bill that helps to get us back to where we need to be, to create an atmosphere that's inviting to everyone, and to give structure and boundaries to utilize so that we don't go back to some of these practices that are not inclusive of those attending the schools and universities. So I'll support this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President, I just wanted to declare Rule 39H. I teach a law school class for the University of Idaho Law School.
Your declaration under the rule will be noted in the journal.
Mr. President,
Senator Semmelroth.
I'd like to declare a 39H. I work at a higher ed institution in Idaho.
Your declaration will be noted in the journal. Is there further debate?
Mr. President.
Senator Guthrie, you have the floor.
Your pause gave me...
Well, I didn't know which university you worked for.
That's way above my pay grade, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President, Senators. And I want to thank the sponsor for some improvements that was made on what was an earlier iteration of this idea. However, I'm still unable to support what is now Senate Bills 1198. Just a few things. You know, the definition of DEI, I think the senator from 29 kind of went through in some detail, which should give all of us some pause, but I think it is problematic, and I think it creates pathways for legal challenges. I look at the 2-year look back on what would have been a violation had this law been in place, and you look at that, and requiring universities to drill into that is not only costly, but to what end? I'm curious if that could open some kind of other legal pathway for some kind of challenge or lawsuit, as they are required to do some costly research. Now, don't get me wrong, I think there's something that needs to be done. I think there's some sideboards that need to be put up, and I think the state board did that with their policy, and there was even an attempt at a bill that would have put into code something along the lines of what they did with some teeth in it, and I think that would have created the right balance. I will tell you that, and this is by admission, and you can think of me what you will, although I took a lot of night classes over the years in both VOTEC and some academic courses, I never went to college, never got a degree. My education was on the farm and maybe the School of Hard Knocks. But I will tell you that in all my years in the legislature, 15 now, not once have I ever had one student come up to me and complain about what they were being forced to be taught in the university setting. Not one student. And Idaho State University is right there in my hometown. And with that, I would tell you that as a layman, I don't know what goes on in higher ed. I don't know what goes on in that space. But what I will tell you, for those of you that haven't met President Wagner, and I know Boise State gets a lot of criticism, maybe fair, maybe not fair. We seem inclined to pick on them. But in Idaho State, if you've never met President Wagner, I hope that someday you will, because you will never meet a more genuine, down-to-earth, sincere man that wants to be the best he can be in the higher education environment. And he says this bill has the potential to be extremely costly and hurt the universities. And by default, because I'm not there, I have great respect for those people that are and the opinions of those people. I want you to remember, Senators, that with rare exceptions of a few 17-year-olds that start their college career out, education career out, and they'll soon turn 18, most of them, every single one of them, with rare exceptions, are adults. And so why is it that we feel like we have to tell adults what they can do or what they should be learning? And remember, this pay thing, yeah, the state contributes money, but students pay tuition. Alumni groups pay a lot of money to keep universities going. I mean, this funding source comes from all aspects of society, and yet we're somehow taking the lead on what we think should or shouldn't be taught. I think that we're running a real risk here of maybe doing some damage in the higher education environment. And I'm not dumb. I'm sure this is going to pass. But as it does, I worry that the consequences could be consequential. And I would have hoped that we would have taken a little bit more methodical approach with those sideboards, see how that worked out before taking a step that I think is a little too far. So I'm not going to be able to support it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator Woodintrow.
Thank you, Mr. President, to debate against the bill.
Have the floor, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. A lot of really great points made, but to reemphasize diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity isn't just about who's in the room and how we can expand who's in the room. Equity is really making sure that once you're in the room, you have equal access to the opportunities. And inclusion is really about, hey, do you feel like you belong and you're not ostracized? And we've had DEI in our country since its inception. And we saw that after slavery, with the Emancipation Proclamation. We had Reconstruction to rebuild and reform a society that enslaved people. And then we saw a huge backlash. I think that's when the KKK actually came into being. And we saw, decades of lynching to keep people in their place. We saw in 1848, the Seneca Falls Convention, the first women's rights convention. And for 50 years, they fought hard to get suffrage, the right to vote, DEI. And I think our modern day DEI really stems much from the civil rights movement in the 1960s. And I think it was John F. Kennedy's Executive Order 10925, signed into law in 1961, that declared it be the plain and positive obligation of the United States government to promote, ensure equal opportunity for all qualified persons without regard to race, creed, color, or national origin. That's from the 1961 Declaration, the Executive Order from John F. Kennedy, 10925.
Thank you for citing the source.
Thank
as
you.
you read. Yeah.
I appreciate it. And then we'll see, and that was really, when you think about it, the federal government is the largest employer in the country. And they said, hey, we have to do better. And we have to ensure that we are not discriminating against people based on their race or national origin, et cetera. And then it was in 1967 that President Johnson amended the order to include sex, and hoping to take affirmative steps in ensuring that we had people in our applicant pools that represented the same diversity of our country. And there's even a 2003 very interesting use of DEI by a football coach, Dan Rooney from the Steelers, if you've heard of the Rooney Rule. And the NFL was trying to address the fact that at that time, over 70% of all the players were black, but there were 6% of coaches who were black and everybody else was white. And it was Coach Rooney that said, we have to do better. It's not that we're going to guarantee the hiring, but we're going to actually, in our interviews, we're going to make sure, since we have so many black players, we better have a candidate or two that we can choose from. Didn't guarantee it. And we still see that today. We don't see parity in coaching today. But it was an effort to say, let's expand the search to at least interview enough candidates. And that's the biggest tenet of DEI. And now we're seeing a rewriting of what it can be on a college campus, the bastion of First Amendment rights. And now we're going to curtail those rights. And I kept thinking to myself over and over, I was on a working group over the fall about this subject. And I kept asking myself, what is at the heart of this? What is this bill really about? Is it myth? Is it misunderstanding? Is it ignorance? What is it? And I finally figured and determined it must be fear. And I think it's fear that's growing in our society, fear of the ideas that are challenging status quo. And to be a strong, free nation, we don't silence voices, we engage them. And throughout history, the greatest threats to freedom have not come from open debate, but from the suppression of it. And when we start banning discussions about diversity, equity, inclusion, we're not protecting our values, we're abandoning them. America was built on the foundation of free thought, free speech, and the belief that we're stronger when we listen, learn, and grow together. Censorship is not a sign of confidence, it's a sign of fear. And when the government legislates out of fear, it inevitably makes mistakes that hurt all of us. And I can think about my mom, who was a Sunday school teacher. She always said, Melissa, fear, when we make decisions out of fear, God said we shouldn't have fear, then we mess up. We do make mistakes. And I think this bill sets a dangerous precedent. If we allow the government to dictate which ideas can be taught in our universities today, what stops the government from deciding what you can talk about in your church or your business or your home? And true freedom means having courage to confront all perspectives, even the ones we don't like and the ones we don't agree with. That is the core of the First Amendment. People fought hard for that. Silencing uncomfortable truth does not make them disappear. I think it only drives the division deeper and weakens our society from within. If we truly believe in the strength of our ideas, if we truly believe in them, then we shouldn't be afraid to test them against opposing viewpoints. That's what makes our nation strong. Not censorship, not control, but the unwavering belief that truth will always rise when given the chance to be heard. And so as I thought about this, I'm asking us to not be afraid of the exchange of ideas. It's important we ask these questions. It's important that we engage in critical thought. And that if we truly believe the ideas that we have, then we'll back them up. We'll fight for them. We don't just, because we're in the majority and we can, with the swipe of a pen, just eliminate them. That is not going to help anyone on our campuses, and it's not going to help anyone in our society. So I'm asking us, let's not betray our principles that we cherish and love. Let's not succumb to that fear. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Is there further debate?
Mr. President.
Senator Lakey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also want to thank the sponsor for their work, also recognizing the work of the DEI committee. I think part of that work resulted in some of the positive changes that we've seen in our universities. Senators, we stand against discrimination. It's wrong, period. There's no but after that. This, for me, is about doing what's right. It's not about fear. Diversity, equity, and inclusion seem to be reasonable words when taken with their traditional common definitions. But the problem is we have to define them as those terms have devolved into something else. They've taken those terms and twisted them into discrimination. We're going to force diversity. We're going to force equity. We're going to force inclusion and give advantage to someone in the name of those terms. You know, we made great progress in the civil rights area, but there are those that have taken that too far. They say other people have been discriminated against, therefore it's my turn. Decisions for admissions, hiring, entrance into a program should not be discriminatory in nature and put in place to force diversity, equity, or inclusion. But that's what's happened. Decisions have been made to push DEI. We need more of this type of person, and we're going to give them an advantage, not based on merit, but because of sex or skin color. We're going to create separate services that segregate people instead of bringing them together. Forcing students to take courses that promote these twisted definitions of DEI, these three words, forcing them to learn and to study these discriminatory terms is wrong. We're not saying you can't teach it in the university. We're saying you can't force them to take that as part of a required course. They can take electives to their heart's content that promote these views if they've chosen to, but they can't be forced to participate in discrimination, in the study of that discrimination in the name of these three terms. Senators, encourage your aye vote.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President,
Senator Wintrow.
to debate a second time.
Does anyone wish to debate for the first time? Senator
Mr.
Hart.
President, I wish to debate for the first time.
You have the floor to debate for the first time.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think this bill is necessary, and I think it's unfortunate that it's necessary because I think this bill is a reaction to something that's going on in our society. When in 1988, I visited South Africa to see what the apartheid environment looked like. In 1988 in South Africa, people had become colorblind. They ignored the apartheid laws. And South Africa was what they called at the time was a scrambled egg. In other words, everybody mixed together and we're ignoring the so-called Group Areas Act and other apartheid laws. But we're not there in our society yet. We're not colorblind, and we should be. And so I think we need a law like this to push back against some of these programs that are forcing opinions on people who maybe are uncomfortable with them. And so I want to read what I think the ultimate goal of being colorblind is, and that is out of the New Testament, Galatians 3, verse 28. I'd like to read it.
Having cited the source, Senator, you may.
For there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor male or female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And that should be our goal so that we are colorblind and we don't need laws like this to make sure everybody's opinion is respected. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Senator Lent.
would the senator from 4 stand for a question?
Senator Taves, will you yield to a question?
Senator yields.
Senator yields.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm old enough to have worked in the corporate setting around something that we called equal opportunity. And in those days, it was the law that we provided opportunities for people, as I understood it, who did not start at the same place as other people in our society. that was the logic, at least as I understood. I wonder if the senator would maybe give us some foundation as to why, what the basis of that was. I realize today we're about changing that, but it seems like there probably was logic that started that originally. Would the senator maybe address that for us?
Senator Taves.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, the exact phrase used commonly is equal opportunity under the law in that situation. And the concept is beautifully presented in this bill that each person, no matter their characteristics, no matter their background, has an equal opportunity under the law. That's what this bill actually would ensure by, especially in the case of admissions or in the case of hiring practices. That's really what this guarantees is that. So, thank you.
Mr. President, to debate the bill.
Senator Lynch, you have the floor.
Just a comment on that, and I, again, appreciate the work that's gone into this, but my experience teaches me that not everyone does start at the same place. And the fairness in me wants to reach out and help the downtrodden and lift up the weak. So that is really what comes from my heart in this. So I do appreciate this, but again, I do understand perhaps where some of this came from. Thank you.
Mr. President.
Senator Wintrow for the second time. Does anyone wish to debate it for the first time? Senator Wintrow, you are recognized to debate a second time.
Thank you, Mr. President. To declare 39H, I have instructed a gender studies class for the last 20-some years and continue to do a workshop at Boise State.
Your declaration will be noted in the journal.
Mr. President, I just want to clarify a couple things that I heard. I think that the Equal Opportunity Commission that was formed under those executive orders so long ago address what the senator from 33 has indicated. A lot of folks don't start in the same place, and especially when our country has faced such grave discrimination in the past, that it would behoove us to make sure that we're at least trying to be more inclusive and invite more people to the table. And just because somebody's invited for an interview and maybe they got the job doesn't mean they don't have merit. Merit is not separate of opportunity. And no one is being forced to hire different folks or take people. So I just really wanted to clear up that little piece, because merit doesn't, a lot of people of color, women, et cetera, have been offered positions. Doesn't mean because of that they also have merit and they're highly qualified. And it feels really bad, to kind of hear that, and I don't think it's intentional. Again, I would ask of us is not to be afraid of that debate and to not silence that on our university's campus. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President.
Senator Shippey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know it's getting late, so I'll try to keep this short. Just some of the comments that have been brought to the floor here about equal opportunity, and I wanted to maybe provide a distinction between an equal opportunity that is provided and an equal opportunity that is offered. And I will say I'm probably one of the least educated members of this Senate. And so as a result, I may not have the same opportunities that others would have because of my lack of education in my background. There's an opportunity out there for me to get the necessary education to maybe fill some of the positions that maybe others are already qualified for. But then the question is, because I don't automatically have that equal standing is that the fault of maybe a hospital that won't hire me to be a surgeon because I don't have that equal opportunity? There is an opportunity for me to qualify for that. So the question is does it need to be provided versus offered? And I would say offered, absolutely. If a college were to prohibit someone of a certain skin color or a certain sex from applying, that's what we're talking about, equal opportunity. But for them to make a special path for them just because of their skin color or their sex or whatever it might be, because maybe they grew up in poverty or don't have maybe a proper education, whose obligation is that? I would say it's simple. You offer the equal opportunity, you don't provide it. And so I think that's the distinction we have to understand here. I think this is a really good bill, and very supportive of it, and very much appreciate the senator who sponsored it bringing it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Is there further debate?
Mr. President,
Senator Blaylock,
to debate the bill.
you have the floor.
Just quickly, I just sitting here listening to the debate, and I don't think that this is a bill coming from a place of fear. I think I think that this is a good bill. I have worked in the professional setting for the last 2 decades, and over that time I've had different groups reach out and want to give me awards, like Women in Tech. And that might be great for some people, but lose the woman part. I just want the award, And I think that's what this is doing. It used to drive me crazy when I was applying to different colleges that I could get a scholarship if I claimed that I was, or if I claimed the part of that I'm half Hispanic, or that I had a better shot at getting into a school because I am a woman. I will be voting for this because being a woman is not a disability, and I want my daughter to see that she will be judged on her character and her hard work and her merit, and not because she was born a girl. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Hearing none, Senator Taves, you're recognized to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank the senators from 9, 33, 23, 10, 28, 29, 19, and 11 for their input in this debate. One thing stuck with me in the debate, and it was one of the senators that said the phrase, "give truth a chance." And I want to tell you that that's what I believe this bill does. I believe that robust debate on our college campuses is critical. Imagine, if you will, a Senate that had a bias reporting system. Imagine that your words, you had to choose your words super carefully because you had to be careful about microaggressions, about implicit bias. Can you imagine that? Unfortunately, the reality is that on some of our college campuses and in some situations, our students have been dealing with that. And it's chilled speech. And have students had an issue with this? I can tell you yes. They've had an issue. I have heard from them directly. They're very uncomfortable talking about it. Speech has been chilled. I want to address a few of the issues that were brought up. I thought the equal opportunity under the law was a really, really good point. And that we need to look at, I think the senator mentioned people the less fortunate. Interestingly, socioeconomic factors are more of an indicator of a student's success in our institutions of higher education than are any other race-based or ethnicity-based or male or female factors, socioeconomic factors. So guess what we're trying to do? We're saying student centers that are offered provide a better solution if they're open to everyone, if they offer the same services to all the students. If the students have socioeconomic issues that are making it more difficult, they should have those services available to them no matter what race they are, no matter whether they're male or female. That is the goal of this legislation. There was a point made that some of the DEI offices have already been closed, and that's true. There's a very real possibility that things can be renamed and they can stay the same. I'm not saying that's what has happened, but I'm saying there's a real danger. What this legislation does is it makes sure that those student centers are available to everyone. To whatever degree there is an issue, there needs to be change. So I've heard on one side, I've heard there aren't these issues on our campuses. To that I would say good. A two-year look back at what policies or classes would have, or trainings would have been in violation of this law should be very, very easy for those institutions that had no issues. And I've heard that and again, that there wasn't an issue. So I don't see what the problem is here with looking back to see what has happened. And I would add this. I love the phrase, if we don't learn from history, we're destined to repeat it. The idea of looking back and seeing what's been done allows us to look forward to a better way of doing things. And that's what this legislation asks for. This bill requires merit-based decisions in our universities. It prevents required training in classes. It doesn't ban or censor anything. If you heard that it censors or bans something, you are misinformed. It literally expressly states on the last page that it cannot limit the freedom of speech of the students that are protected by state and federal law. It says that it will not take away the teacher's ability to have the freedom that we want them to have. So let's give truth a chance. Let's allow our students to debate freely without concern that they could be reported for bias. Let's give them a chance to pursue truth without having ideologies forced on them. And to the degree that we do that, we will prepare them very well for a bright future in Idaho. Debate is closed.
Debate is closed. The question before the Senate is, shall Senate Bill 1198 pass the Senate? The Senate Secretary will call the roll.
Adams, Anthon, Berndt, Bjerke, Blaylock, Burtonshaw, Carlson, Coho, Cook, Den Hartog, Foreman, Galloway, Groh, Guthrie, Harris, Hart, Kaiser, Cole, Lakey, Lent, Nichols, Okonowitz, Ricks, Ruckty, Samaroff, Shippey, Taylor, Taves, Van Orden, Wardingle-King, Wintrow, Wohler, Woodward, Cito, Seiderveld, Burtonshaw,
The vote count shows 27 in favor with 8 against, a majority having voted in the affirmative. Senate Bill 1198 is passed the Senate. Is there a correction to title? Hearing none, title is approved, and the bill will be transmitted to the House of Representatives.
Mr. President,